Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist. Today I'm bringing you a movie review. This film comes from 1995. It was directed by Joe Johnston, and it was released by TriStar Pictures, and it was written by Greg Taylor, Jim Strain, and Chris Van Allsburg, based on a storybook from 1981, also by Chris Van Allsburg. And the movie in question is Jumanji. Jumanji was one of my childhood favorite movies. I had this VHS as a kid. This was played on constant loop. I mean, this, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids from 1989, Casper from 1995, the list goes on. I had so many movies as a kid that I kind of associated in the kids' horror club because I was obsessed with that stuff. And Jumanji got played quite a lot when I was younger. And I know this movie came out probably when I was like, maybe a year, almost a year and a half years old. And I've seen it so many times over the years, probably at this point 100. I have it on Blu-ray here, which I think currently is the best specs you can get for the film, sadly. And it's a shame because this movie, it stars Robin Williams, who is no longer with us. And if you don't know the story behind Robin Williams, it's a tragedy, but I think a lot more people have started to think back on this movie in recent years because of him and because of how his movies impacted pretty much an entire generation, if not generations of kids, which is good. But I have to say, even with that aside and it being a Robin Williams movie, or even the director Joe Johnston, who actually directed Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and has directed many underrated classic films that I enjoy, like The Rocketeer or Captain America, The First Avenger. The list goes on with this guy. He's incredible. I have to say that this is still a classic movie from the 90s, and it still feels right at home with kids' horror. In fact, I would say that Jumanji, when it came out in 1995, it was so big that kids' horror try to compensate and have similar ideas to what Jumanji brought, because I think the world noticed how dark this movie really did get for a family movie. And you want to think that maybe because it was in the 90s and they were able to do darker things with family content, I don't know. But it really does hold up, especially with like today's audience that are, I guess, more ravenous for darker content. If that's for you, maybe give Jumanji a try. I have to say, it is surprisingly dark for a family movie. It's kind of horrific, and I definitely think it belongs in the kids' horror discussion. So I have a lot to unpack with this movie. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the plot overview without giving too much away. So Jumanji, I think, is like an hour and 40-something minutes long, and it begins off with the movie, once the title card comes on, of two boys in the 1800s. They're out in this, woodland area, and it's raining outside, and they're carrying with them this crate that they're desperately trying to get rid of. And within the crate, we hear this drumming going on, and the kids notice that it's getting louder and they need to get rid of it. Presumably because they just got done dealing with whatever is inside of this crate. And they take it upon themselves to find this random, patch of grass, and they bury it. And they pretty much say good riddance and Godspeed to whoever comes across this board game next, or whatever is inside of the crate that we learn is a board game next. So it cuts to this precisely the year 1969, and we meet this kid named Alan Parrish. And I think in the movie they say that he's in 6th grade, so he's probably like 11 years old, character-wise, in the movie. And he's riding his bike through town, and he's being chased by these bullies that are after him. And we soon realize that Alan, as he's riding through town, there's a statue of what we learn later is his ancestor, and he's riding his bike over to this shoe factory, which is, Parrish Shoes, that is run by his father. We learn that Alan is from an affluent family and in a very important family in this town of New Hampshire that this film takes place in. And they go, the town goes back with this family generations, and pretty much they have created jobs for the town. And Alan, he goes to his father's shoe factory to hide out, and we meet this character played by David Alan Grier, I think that's his name. And he's kind of created a new basketball shoe, and he wants to pitch it to Alan's father, and he's talking with Alan about it. And because Alan's so preoccupied with the bullies, he looks at the shoe and puts it on a conveyor belt, and it ends up messing up the conveyor belt, and pretty much David Alan Grier's character gets punished for it, while Alan, instead of coming forward with what he did, he just kind of ignores it. And once he leaves, he of course gets beat up by these bullies that were after him, and his bike gets stolen. Well, in the aftermath of that, he overhears some drumming, similar to what we heard in the prologue. And he goes over to this area where there's some construction going on. I guess the factory's looking to expand over in a new area. And he follows the sound, and he finds this, deep in part of the earth where they've already dug, and he digs through it and then finds the crate that we saw in the prologue. He opens it up. He sifts through the sand that's inside of it. I guess the sand was put there to muffle the sound. And it's this really ornate board game, and it reads Jumanji on the cover. Well, once these workers see Alan, he gets scared and he runs with the board game all the way back to his house. And his house is really nice, presumably so, because his family's affluent. And he takes it to his living room. He's playing around with it. His mother notices that he got hurt. And he's pretty much decides that he's going to come back to it later. Well, when his dad gets home, his dad and his mom are planning to go to a party where his father's the guest of honor. And Alan has pretty much dropped a bombshell when his dad, after overseeing what happened to Alan and being notified that he got beat up, he thinks that it would be good to give Alan some good news. And I put this in quotation marks because they plan to send him away to this private school that goes back generations, and all, his father and his forefathers have gone, so Alan should be appreciative of it. But Alan takes it as that his family's trying to get rid of him, and he's not going to be happy. And he has some choice words with his father before they leave to go where they need to go. And Alan decides to run away, and he makes his plan to packs up some of his stuff, and he's about to head out, and he forgets the board game, and he's wondering what to do with it. And lo and behold, he gets a knock at the door, and it ends up being this girl named Sarah. And Sarah may or may not be involved why these boys were attacking him earlier, because one of the kids might like this girl Sarah, but Alan and her are actual good friends. And Sarah's like, what are you planning on doing? He's like, I'm getting my bike. And she's like, well, I can help you with that. Don't worry about it. Don't be upset. And they hear this drumming going on, and she's like, what is that? And he's like, you can hear it too. So she comes inside. They find the board game, and they decide to play around with it. Well, the board game has special properties. The pieces can move around on their own, and they think it could be some magnetism going on the board itself. But Sarah rolls some dice, and it causes the pieces to move. And it may or may not trigger some bats from Africa to come into the real world. And then when Alan hears this phenomenon going on, he's kind of freaked out and rolls what he rolls. And when he rolls the dice, he is pretty much set to go inside of the board game and wait until another player can roll 5 or 8. And Alan, we see this scene where he gets sucked into the board game. Sarah, of course, freaks out. The bats come out to attack her and chase her out of the house. And then we get a cut scene pretty much to present day of 1995. And from there, we see this woman and her niece and nephew, Judy and Peter, have come to this house that has been abandoned for 26 years, seemingly, or for quite a few years. And they just bought it for a good price. And Judy and Peter, we learn this backstory that they've lost their parents in a tragic accident. And I think it was a hiking accident or a skiing accident or something like that. And they're kind of grieving. And this is a new lifestyle that they're, getting used to having to move to the small town with their aunt with seemingly nothing to do. They're not going to be happy as kids. Because in this, future timeline, as we learn throughout the movie, the jobs that the Paris shoe factory brought to the town are no longer there. So it's now become kind of poverty ridden. And there's a bunch of, kooks living in it, let's just say. Well, Judy and Peter, they're kind of, being around the bush with their aunt. They go to the first day of school. The aunt kind of fixes up the house to make it look nicer. But Judy and Peter, they have this weird, interaction early on. And I'm going to be very brief with this. They think they see bats up in this attic portion of the house, and they get told by this, exterminator guy that a boy named Alan Parrish disappeared, and people theorize that he may have been murdered by his own father, and nobody knows the true story of what happened. And Judy and Peter have pretty much told their aunt that they think that it's actually true and that she should kind of think about why she got the house so cheap. Well, after that, it comes like to be their second day of school, and their aunt, decides like, hey, are you fine waiting on the bus by yourself? And they're like, yeah. She heads off to work, but the two kids keep hearing this drumming coming up from the attic where they saw the bats. And they decide to go up and investigate the sound, and they end up finding the board game stashed up in there, presumably from Alan's parents, after he went missing, probably put it up there. And they pull out the board game, and they take it upon themselves to take out the extra pieces and throw them on there, and they start playing. And when Judy plays her turn, it brings out some giant mosquitoes, which pretty much come out and swarm the kids and then bust out the window. And then when it's Peter's turn, he rolls a pair of snake eyes. And in the game of Jumanji, there's some instructions on the board game. If you roll doubles, you're able to go again. But when he rolls snake eyes, it brings, let's just say, some monkeys to life, and it causes, some havoc in the kitchen, and then they escape the house, and the kids are kind of bewildered of what to do. And he's like, well, I rolled snake eyes, let's see what happens if I roll again. Well, he finally rolls a number that means something to an Alan Parrish vanished. There needed to be a 5 or an 8 roll to get him out of the game. That's what the game said. Well, Peter rolls a 5, but it brings a lion into the attic, which chases the kids. But it also brought out a, full-grown man, Alan Parrish now, who's played by Robin Williams. And he's kind of dressed like a hermit from the forest, and he has a full beard. He probably smells. But the guy knows how to put away the lion and save the children. And then Alan, he's taken aback by being in his house, and he's like, where am I? And the kids are like, oh, are you Alan Parrish? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, why are you in my house? And they're like, we live here now. And Alan doesn't know what to think, and he goes into his childhood room, sees all of his things, sees a picture of his parents. He's like, where are my parents? And they're like, the kids are like, we don't know. Maybe we can help you. And he's like, well, I can find it on my own. And Alan, he heads out and he looks out in the streets from his childhood, and now it's like a rundown slum area. He goes over to his father's factory. It's been closed down. It's disheveled. There's a homeless person living in there. And he learns some more backstory about what happened. And his dad essentially spent all of his money looking for Alan all those years ago. And then the factory suffered, and then the jobs, suffered, and the business suffered as a whole, which caused it to close down, which is a sad story, but that's just what happened. And after hearing all this, and Alan, he even, I skipped over this part, but he actually runs into David Alan Grier's character, who he recognizes. And there's a scene where these monkeys hijack his car and blow a shotgun through the roof. I think that's pretty funny. But he knows this guy from his childhood as well. So he's like, all right, well, I've done all I can do, and, maybe it's time that I listen to these kids and we figure out what to do next. And the kids are like, maybe we should play the game, because the only way to get rid of these things that we've brought out into the real world is to finish the game. And Alan, he shaves his beard, cuts his hair, he finds some clothes up in the attic, and he feels finally prepared to tackle this head on. But then he realizes that it's not his turn. It's actually Sarah's turn, because if there's 4 players, Sarah went first, and it was Alan originally back in '69. Then it was Judy and Peter. It goes back to Sarah. So now they have to go find Sarah's character, where she's been. And they find her. She's at her childhood home, but she's taken up like this role of being a medium, let's just say. And she's traumatized of the events, but Alan convinces her that it is him and that they need to finish the board game. And Sarah's reluctant to do so, and they go back to Alan's house, or childhood house, I should say, to sit down and play the game. And he tricks her to throw the dice, which kickstarts more events of the film. And when she throws the dice, at first, it pretty much triggers these vines to come out of the ceiling, and there's a giant Venus flytrap looking thing that shoots out a vine at Peter, and it's pretty scary in like a practical effect way. But once they get themselves out of that ordeal, it's Alan's turn to roll the dice. And when Alan rolls, he pretty much brings in a character called Van Pelt, who is played by the same actor who plays Alan's childhood father. And Van Pelt is this hunter, and he has a musket, and he's shooting at, Alan, Sarah, and the children, and pretty much chases them out of the house. And I forget if it's like Judy's role or Alan's role, but there's also a stampede involved with that, where the stampede comes not too long after Van Pelt and takes the board game, and it's up to Peter to kind of get it and save it. But even after they get it, Alan is swiftly arrested for what happened earlier and taken into the cop car by David Alan Grier's character. So he gets separated from the other 3, and Van Pelt takes it upon himself to target these 3 while Alan's out of the picture. And Alan, convinces the cop that he's actually Alan Parrish, and the cop's mystified, pulls over. Alan tricks the cop into letting him go, or doing something foolish so he can escape, and does so. But Van Pelt, the hunter, ends up finding the other 3, and something happens to Peter because he tries to cheat to just end the game suddenly so it can all be reversed quicker, and he ends up getting put back to the start and turned into like a monkey as a punishment. So after that, it's Sarah's turn, but Van Pelt steals the game, and they have to go hide out in a supermarket. And we see Van Pelt trying to upgrade his guns because he's like mystified that there's modern firearms and semi-automatics and stuff. So that's a whole thing, and there's a whole supermarket debacle involving that. And through that, Alan is able to reconnect with the other 3. They get a hold of the game once more, and they take it back to the house to try to finish the game. But of course, when they do so, they unleash more monsters, some more chaos, and the stakes start to grow as these events just keep piling on in the house. I don't want to give too much spoilers from this point, but let's just say it comes down to a point where there's some cataclysmic stuff happening from the game now, where there's a sense of urgency to put a stop to it. And these characters may or may not succeed at doing so, particularly referring to Alan and Sarah here. And once they are able to possibly, in the situation they're in, there's a twist involved with those 2 characters and what that means by the ending of the story. And the lessons they've learned are going to have to be carried in a pretty much a redo kind of way. And I'll just leave it at that. And they feel obligated to help out the folks that they did wrong, and we see that unfold with the characters. And then we get an ending where we see maybe a reuniting of certain characters, which is kind of touching, even though mildly confusing. But that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of Jumanji, the movie here. So Let's go ahead and start off with the positives of this film because I have quite a few here. The first positive I can say about this movie is how good of a story it is for a family movie. This film does a really stellar job at conveying the message of, not being able to see what you have until it's stripped away from you and being grateful of what you have once you learn to appreciate those things. And while this movie isn't always trying to go that route of, you know, missing where you come from and trying to gain that back, in fact, it's actually like, missing where you come from, but also trying to make the most of it and, um, change the situation as well. The messages in the story rock. I think the character writing in this movie is surprisingly great, especially Alan. His story about, feeling like he's kind of like the black sheep of the Parrish family. He feels like his parents want to pawn him off because he's getting bullied, and people in the town don't like him because of his reputation, and even he doesn't like his reputation. But once he gets sucked into the board game and he kind of grows up within that world within a world, and he's released, you can see that mildly jaded side of him where he had to grow up in the wild and learn not to be a kid. And then once he's put back into the real world, all these emotions and all these things that he had to put away for survival for so many years have come back to the forefront. And you really feel for his character, and you understand that he has to put aside pretty much his childlike mind to, be mature in the situation, and he rises to the occasion for the others that are playing the game with him. And he has a strong character arc in this story. Sarah, played by Bonnie Hunt, she's also a fun character because she also shares the trauma that she had to go through Alan's disappearance, and how she was ostracized, and how people didn't believe her, and how it affected her emotionally, and how and why it's difficult for her to want to play this game again with him. It's easy to see. Even Judy and Peter having that, typical 90s sympathetic backstory for these kids. Often than not, it was a huge trope back in the day to have one or even both of your parents die. So you're like either a half orphan or a full-on orphan kind of thing. But Judy and Peter, they have great sibling dynamics. They're very supportive with each other. They're not annoying. They have good banter. And Kirsten Dunst and I think the kid's name is Jonathan Hyde. I want to say that's his name. They did a good job for kid actors in the 90s, especially Kirsten Dunst. She stole the show. And yeah, great characters. The concept of a board game coming to life is super fun, and I think the reason why this movie is able to register as well, even given the good character writing and the good concept, is when we see this stuff done, there's a good amount of great practical effects, and some dated CGI, but some serviceable CGI here to really accentuate how terrifying these things are that are happening to these characters. Like the Venus flytrap stuff is fun. Even the hunter with like a musket trying to kill them is pretty intimidating. The scene early on in the movie when Alan gets sucked into the board game is some of the most terrifying stuff I've ever seen. There's some legitimate threats with this board game. And the mischief monkeys are fun, and they just wreak havoc and destroy things. You got the stampeding elephants, giraffes, and all that, demolishing buildings and sides of homes and stuff like that. It's just understandably threatening, and it really does sell the sense of urgency these characters are in. And I have to tip my hat to it. I think the atmosphere of the film is also pretty cool. You buy that this is a small New Hampshire town. You can see that that the Paris shoe factory, that's a heavy part of the story, did matter to the livelihood and success of the town, especially in the alternate timeline that was created when Alan got sucked into the board game, where people lost their jobs and it was due to a grieving father and all that, but you can see the disdain on the parish name as well. That ties also into the themes of the story and the writing. There's some great symmetry all around with that, but the town itself is believable as a small town, which is nice. And I have to say this, the soundtrack of this movie is really cool. I think the soundtrack holds up well, and it's well utilized throughout the movie. Joe Johnston's directing ability and cinematography work is fun at points. There's some creative shots in here. And yeah, I mean, all in all, I can go on forever with the positives of this film, but it's just an addicting watch. For an hour and 40-something minute movie, normally those can be kind of tedious to watch. Not saying this movie isn't tedious to watch. I think that's one of the knocks against it. It does take a good 40 to 50 minutes to get into the hijinks of what this movie is known for. But I will say that for the most part, even during its tedious points, it's building up characters in a pretty good, brisk-paced way. It has a lot of characters introduced, and it develops them kind of evenly, and it gives you enough backstory to work with before Judy and Peter enter the board game of the story. And I think even despite that, taking a while to get to, it was mostly good here. And yeah, let's get into, I guess, negatives with the movie. And I only have like maybe one or two realistically. I've already brought up, it is kind of tedious to sit through. And what I mean by that is you have to sift through the characterization in like the first 40 or 50 minutes. And I will be honest, the second negative here, and this is kind of a two-pronged thing, the action sequences are kind of dated, and it's mostly dated because there's some CGI effects in here that are hilariously outdated and bad. Whether we're talking about the look of the monkeys or just the CGI in general, here's the thing, y'all. This issue could be fixed if the studio here or the parent company of TriStar decide to remaster this movie one day and just upgrade the CGI in it. Problem solved. But as is, there's some jarring effects in this film that is hard to overlook. And I'll just leave it at that. There's really no specifics here. Not one animal deserves the most flack. But I will say, if I had to give, the weakest link of effects to this movie, it is easily the monkeys. They looked pretty embarrassingly amateur, even compared to that time's CGI capabilities. But I do get that CGI in 1995 was not an everyday thing, and they were trying to mix practical and CGI here. And the reason why I'm not going to be the biggest stickler on this is because they did try to have some good prosthetics in the movie to counterbalance the CGI, so I'm more forgiving on that. But other than those things, I had a blast with this movie this time around, and I always have a blast with this film. Is it a perfect film? No. Is it like the most mind-blowing thing ever? No. But is it great for a family movie? Still? Yes, absolutely. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I was kind of on the fence with this because with films, I don't give quite, precise ratings like I do kids' horror books or stuff. I go by 0.5 increments. But if I had to rate this thing from like a 0 to 5 star basis, if I wanted to be exact, I'd probably give this like a 4.4 out of 5 stars. But I'm willing to bump it up to like a 4.5 and give it like a light great or maybe a high very good plus. It's in that territory of a 4.4 to a 4.5. And I do think that the tedious nature of it and the effects do kind of weigh because they take up a lot of the film. This film has a lot of CGI, and it has a lot of time in that first like 40 or 50 minutes, like I mentioned, being tedious. But other than that, this is a bona fide classic. If you haven't seen Jumanji before, you need to check it out. And it's also important to check this movie out, especially if you're like a Goosebumps fan, because I am hard confident that this movie not only went on to spawn movies like this, like the sister movie Sathura, but also influenced the plot of Goosebumps 2015 and even Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween. And if you see this movie, you'll definitely see the similarities there with that. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Jumanji. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.